Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. My guest tonight is an award-winning author, a multi-published author. She's the author who writes the kind of books that keep you up until 2 in the morning, even when you have to get up early to go to work the next day. Kit Reed, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is exciting. I have a lot of things to talk with you about tonight, particularly your latest book, Enclave. But before we get to that, I want to give the viewers a little background about some of the things that you've written. And in preparing for the show, I noted that you've been a finalist for quite a few prestigious writing awards, among them the Hugo, the World Fantasy Award, Tiptree twice, and the International Horror Guild Award. Were the awards for the same type of book? Was there variety in there?
They were all different. Some were for stories, and I was always a bridesmaid. But I suppose the two Tiptrees I can talk about most easily. One was for a story called, novella called Little Sisters of the Apocalypse, and the other was for a collection of fiction from the beginning of my career. We won't talk about which year until the mid to late 90s when the book was published.
Wow.
And there have obviously been more stories since. And it was called Weird Women, Wired Women.
Weird Women, Wired Women. I love the title. So in the body of work that you have novels and obviously the short stories, books for adults. I know you have at least one book for young adults. And I found in reading reviews that for some people, they'll label your work science fiction, speculative fiction, literary fiction, thrillers, and at least 3 comic novels.
3, yeah.
So that's
some of the
quite
stories
a
are
variety.
funny.
Is there a common thread? Do you find with that kind of variety of approach to the writing, do you find any thread or something that one might call a writer's thumbprint in your work?
In terms of style, the style fits what the piece is, and if it's a comic piece, there's going to be a certain kind of timing, and if it's an elegiac novel, the prose is going to be different. It all depends on what I'm doing, but they're all me.
Now, when you say me, do you mean that do you intentionally write about things that are autobiographic?
No, I mean that I become each one of these characters.
Oh, I see.
So if I've written The Baby Merchant about a guy who is in his 20s who steals children to sell to people for profit, that isn't autobiographical in any respect.
No, not at all. But do you find any themes that recur in your stories? Like I find when I write, I'm drawn to writing stories about sisters.
No. Usually things don't end very well for people, which may be the only thing that I have in common in a lot of these pieces, and sometimes it's a funny thing and sometimes it's a not funny thing. That could be it. What I'm most interested in is how everybody starts out with great intentions for whatever it is they're doing and end up accidentally shooting themselves in the foot, which happens a lot.
It does. It happens a lot in real life.
Yeah, exactly.
It certainly does. Let's talk a little bit about that label, science fiction versus speculative fiction. What are the differences?
People write books about this stuff, and I won't try to distinguish that way. For me, it is that science fiction begins with an idea rather than character. It is about something that wouldn't have happened if it had not been for some element of science in it, whether it's the invention of a rocket ship or a genome or something completely bizarre that we haven't even thought of. Speculative fiction is character-driven and usually a bit closer to what we have today. It's the near future, and it's based on what if this had happened? What if we push this just a little bit farther? Thinner Than Thou is about what if people say, okay, I ate the whole chocolate cake, now I have to go to the gym and atone. they are beginning to take body image as a religion, and that is probably where that book started. So we had the evangelist, the Reverend Earl, who helps you get thin.
So this isn't so. These stories aren't so far in the future that they're not. A person wouldn't read them and go, "Oh, that's."
No, they're
so
day
far
after
away.
tomorrow. They're day after tomorrow.
Very real. I think that makes them all the more powerful. The
It's
possibility.
the only thing that interests me. You know, if it wasn't as close to reality as I could make it with things slightly skewed, I wouldn't be interested in what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, that almost answers my next question. What attracted you to this whole genre? Obviously, you want something that is believable, even though it's futuristic. In a sense,
probably that I read enormous. There are probably 39 Oz books, and I read all of them at least 4 or 5 or 6 times when I was small. So from the beginning, I had the idea that the world was made up of this what if, and a lot of my reading kind of fed into that, so that I became aware that it didn't have to be, this table has this cloth on it, this cup is here, it is filled to this level, that you could go a little bit farther with things, you could push them.
But it was the Oz books.
That I think so, yeah. That, comics.
That's interesting. I remember in the 4th grade, I read the Wizard of Oz, the one that people are most familiar with. I read it 34 times that summer. I would finish it and start again, and finish it and start again. There was something that really drew me into that book.
I wish you'd read the other 39,
I'm going to have to go do that.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely have to do that. Well, let's talk a little bit about genre labels. I mean, the whole idea of speculative fiction, science fiction, literary, comic, YA, romance, Western, historical. There's so many labels. What do you think about the labels in general?
It depends. If that is the only thing people think about you, that's not a good thing. However, if you are the marketing department of a publishing company, you want something you can attach, a label that will attract people to something. They might be disappointed because it isn't what they thought it would be, but it's like, this is SF. I will buy this.
So it's good for a marketing tool.
It's good for marketing. It's not so good when your book is going out for a review, because there are people who say, that, and put it to one side.
Yes. I want to go back to something you mentioned just a moment ago about reading the Oz books when you were young, and you mentioned also reading comics.
Oh, yeah.
Comic books. So what did you have favorites?
Of the comic books, probably Captain Marvel no longer exists, but I pretty much liked him, but mostly Batman. I wanted to be Robin. It was that simple.
See, for me, it was Katie Keene.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't read girl stuff.
I did. I loved Katie Keene comics.
Actually, Brenda Starr was a reporter, and
Yes.
that I was interested in.
Yeah, she had a cool career.
Yeah, she
That was
totally
good.
did.
Yes. Well, let's talk now about your latest book, Enclave.
Yeah.
Which I'm reading it now, and it is definitely one of those books to keep you up at night.
I'm not going to tell you how it comes out.
No, don't tell me. But can you give us a little synopsis, at least about the setup of the book?
It takes place on a Greek island that is a mountain, and at the top there is a Benedictine monastery. An ex-Marine who feels that he owes a debt to society has built an academy there for what turned out to be the next generation of Paris Hilton's, Lindsay Lohan's impossible problem children who have very rich parents who will pay enormous amounts of money to get rid of them. And he sets off with these people. Meanwhile, there, in fact, is one leftover monk in the monastery, which includes tunnels under the mountain. There is also a mysterious stranger in the crypts, all beside the point. Everything goes brilliantly at the academy, where people that really wanted to get away from their lives are the faculty. Every one of them has a secret and a problem. Things are going just fine until 2 kids crash the island's computer system at the same time that children in the infirmary come in sick, getting sicker, getting sicker. So there's a computer virus, there is plague. And that's all I'm going to tell you right now.
Oh, yes.
There is the physician's assistant, who's a beautiful woman who is dealing with all this, but that's all I'm going to tell you.
All right.
She's in love with Sarge.
Okay, and he's the Marine who has a debt to society.
Who has run this,
Okay.
yes.
I want to ask a little bit about the setting. It's set on an island in, I think you mentioned Greece.
I think a Greek island.
A Greek
it's
island.
a nebulous Greek island that no one finds on the maps because it's so obscure.
Have you, well, obviously you haven't been to that particular
No,
one, but have
I
you been to Greece? Have you gone?
I've never been to Greece. However, we had a Jesuit pal who had been to Mount Athos. This is the kind of thing that sticks in your mind.
Yes.
Where there is a monastery you can go for a retreat. And he got there. It's all very Spartan at the top. It's nothing like Mount Clovis Abbey, which is a Benedictine abbey. It's very sparse and all the rest of it. And the monks take you up in baskets. It's a sheer drop. I'm sure there are modern ways to get there, but they don't use them. There's a basket relay so that at every stage there are monks with baskets hauling you up to the next stage. And this is how he got to the top. So that stuck with me.
Wow.
And,
so that part's real.
That part is real, and I think the monastery itself, which the Sarge has revamped, turned into an academy. There are beautifully redecorated rooms. The chapel has become an assembly hall. All this is going on. There's also, as it turns out, a whole crypt filled with monks who have died mysteriously 50 years or so before. And we had a pal who actually spent some time in a Benedictine monastery when the abbot died. And when the abbot died, they laid him on a catafalque in the chapel for too long. He said that they didn't embalm the body, which meant that it was pretty exciting when you were there praying, which everyone did for days. And at a crucial moment in the farewell funeral mass, 3 bats came down and circled over the catafalque, which that stuck in my head. So all this kind of feeds into the underpinnings of the academy, as Sarge calls it.
So I'm always curious about how a writer researches a book, particularly in this case, a book that's set in a place you haven't physically visited yourself. Now, obviously, because of your friendship with this man who spent some time studying to be a monk, you get some inside scoop. So how do you do the research for this Greek island?
Most of it came from what I know. I went to a boarding school for a year run by nuns. I lived on a Marine base for 2 years in which I saw, everything is done by the numbers.
Yes.
And you get the idea that, and I mentioned this to a couple of religious, that I've mentioned the idea that the disciplines, both of them, the religious one and the other, run by the numbers.
So that discipline plays into the plot in the book?
It plays into just how the thing is put together, because I know both of these places, I know these disciplines, and it's interesting to me.
Do you do a lot of research on the internet?
I obviously Google gave me images of Mount Athos so I could get an idea of what that looked like, and I Googled the Benedictine rule to find out, it's Lauds, Matins, Compline, Terce, what the order was of the prayers and when they said them. But the rest of it I made up.
When you sit down to write, like I know with a screenplay, when you start a screenplay, I've talked to a number of screenplay teachers, and they said you always need to know the end in mind because of the finite length that you have to work with. Did you know when you started writing Enclave, did you know the end?
I didn't know until about a month before I finished it,
Really?
and then I had insomnia for, I've never been awake all night, but that night I was awake all night, and in the morning I had it worked out in my head. By that time I was, let's say, 2/3 of the way through to 3/4 of the way through, and I saw how it was going to end.
Well, I see. Now, I admire that you can do that. I can't, absolutely cannot do that. But if
I
you
have to. It's a matter of options that you've established these characters. They will do these things in this circumstance. These are the circumstances, and at a certain point, it all narrows down and goes where it was going to go the whole time.
But are you saying that there could have been another ending?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
No,
okay.
that's the only way it could have ended. But I didn't know that one. I never know when I start.
And you're okay with that?
It's the only way I know to do it.
See, I know two different kinds of writers. The way you do that, and I am just the opposite. And I'll sit down and outline, sketch out as much as I possibly can. I'll often detour and I don't necessarily wind up where I thought I was
Exactly.
going
Yeah,
to.
it's never carved in stone. And
Yeah.
which is what I used to tell students that if it helps you, try to outline what's going on or make a list of the events in this story, but they're not carved in stone.
Right.
If it changes, it will change.
Well, when you had that moment, that night where you didn't sleep, is there anything now when you look back at that, whatever it was in the plot that you were working through, what can you, without giving away the story, can you give us any idea? Was it something about a character or something about a clue that was
It's very
dropped,
hard to
or?
explain. If you can imagine a flow chart, it's that you have the options going out this way, and all of a sudden, this is the point I was at, and they had to click together. In short, oh, if that's going to happen, then this will happen. If that's going to happen, this will happen, that way.
And for that to happen, you had to have dropped some clues.
Oh, well, you
early
had to
on.
be, the
Everything
thing is
had-
that if you are working things out, if you imagine that you're getting the prose right, the whole time your mind is helping you solve problems. You are, if there's something the matter with a sentence and I keep messing with it and it's finally right and it's okay to go on to the next one, in the meantime, the reason it's okay to go on is because I've worked something out that I didn't know was there.
Do you find that family members, do any of them ever say when they read your work, oh, I can tell you were writing about so-and-so?
No, that's an extremely cool thing, and I do not write about my children ever. In my first novel, Joe, my husband, had as a small child a pair of green corduroy pants that he hated, and I put those on a character. But that's about as close as it ever got to use of family members. I did a book about kids, academic children, an academic novel from the point of view of the kids called The Ballad of T. Rantula in the late 70s when everyone's marriage was falling apart and all that. And I ran it past my 12-year-old at that point. Is this right? Is this right? Did I do this right, John? And that was him checking my facts, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Do you find when you do book signings, because I'm sure that you do a lot of book signings, especially when a new book comes out, do people generally comment on, I loved your book for the plotting or the characters? Because I find most often fiction will kind of divide itself.
I think people who like my stuff like it because it's character driven, I think, more
I
than
can,
anything
just
else.
from the parts that I've read so far, yeah, that's what I would think too.
But I mean, there
Very
is
strong
story. There
character.
has to be story.
Yeah.
And, my sense of things is that you cannot separate these two elements, that they are all part of the same engine. And it's when you say, oh, I've got a great plot, but I don't know who's going to be in it, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got to have a sense of them from day one so you know what they're going to do when you get to day 30 of their adventure.
All right. One of the things that I want to ask you to do, Kit, is read from the book Enclave. It's sort of a tradition on page 1.
Okay.
To
but
read
as
a
you
little.
know, because I do not have reading glasses, I will be reading from a printout of page 1.
That's fine. My cards printed out are very large type as well. So
well, actually,
you go right ahead.
yeah, actually, mine are okay.
Yeah.
The speaker is Sergeant Whitemore, who is known as Sarge. Departure day: gangplank up, repel all boarders, shove off before the oceans boil. Destination: the last safe place. When the mob on the hillside starts to move, my girl Cassie gasps. It looks like a whole mountain is coming down on the intake hangar, a human avalanche, billionaires scrambling to offload their young. One look at the sky should tell these kids they're running ahead of the apocalypse, but they're fighting every step of the way. Parents on rafts and in cigarette boats storm the steel nets that ring the harbor, anything to cram their terrible kids onto my hovercraft. The world's going to hell, and there's only one boat leaving for the last safe place, mine. In the hush before we open the hangar doors, my girl Cassie whispers, "How did you know?" There's no way I can explain it. I just did. He has somehow everyone believes the world is going to end soon. When the voice in the whirlwind spoke, I was in country, which our troops have been in a few too many of lately, dumb, bloody wars in bad terrain. Where I was, the fighting still goes on. Yeah, they told us that particular war would last about 10 minutes. Sure it would. They have to tell you something. Things happened that you don't need to know about. I did things. People died, but that's not the worst of what we did. Yes, I'm ashamed. It was not pretty. Unlike the others, I survived. As I walked out of the firestorm, I heard, "You will make up for what you did here." Wham! When I got up, I was spitting tears and shrapnel, and everything was different. I heard that voice. I heard it loud and clear. "The world is sick, and you alone." And I think I've just come to the end.
Okay, okay. That's fine. We're getting a sense. We're getting
All right,
a sense of the style.
the voice, it goes on actually to say, "You will create a place where no evil comes."
And what I love about that, and that comes right from page 1, chapter 1, you very quickly, and this is a lesson for people in the audience who are writing, you very quickly establish that man's goal. So we know exactly what he wants.
I have actually, we're going to get to this part, but have been having conversations with people, editors who read on e-readers now. And if you had to have an immediate grab at the beginning, you're now getting the attention of someone who's reading on a Kindle or a Sony e-reader.
Yes.
And
you have
it's
about
not
the
the
size
same
of an
kind
index
of
card.
concept. It's about this size, but nobody concentrates in the same way on what they see on the screen as they do on the printed page. So with that in mind, you cannot spend 5 days and 5 nights establishing what you're doing before things begin.
That's a good point. That's a good lesson for people to know. And just for you in the audience, we are talking with Kit Reed, multi-published author, award-nominated author, and latest book is called Enclave. I'm always fascinated by this, and sometimes I hesitate to ask because I can see sometimes writers kind of roll their eyes and groan a little, but I'm so intrigued by the storyline. Where did you get the idea for Enclave?
Well, this is kind of a one-off thing. I have a dream in which I have dreams that are play like movies, and usually I am a character rather than myself. And in this case, I was a kid in a Gothic boarding school at a computer which had seized up. It had crashed. I became aware in the dream that the entire system had crashed, and at the same time I was aware that in the infirmary, which was somewhere downstairs, which it isn't in the book, but in the dream it was somewhere way downstairs, kids were getting sick, and that if I didn't cure the computer virus, they were going to die.
Oh my gosh,
that was
you
the
got
dream.
all of that in a dream.
I totally did, yeah. I dream rather vividly. One of my dreams was titled "The Baby's Foot." It was a horror dream. You don't want to know.
Oh yeah, we'll skip that one for the moment. So when you got up, did you recognize it as, here's the plot for the novel?
No, I sat with it for a while, and then I thought, I'm going to see if I can write this. It's never like this has been that would not be a plot or a story. That was the situation.
Just the situation,
yeah,
right?
That was all, and the rest of it kind of came from that.
Did it come immediately?
Nothing comes immediately.
But was it a matter of, okay, I'm working on something else now, and I'll keep this in the back of my head?
Oh, no. It's that when you start to do something, you do it until it's done. It's not like a buffet where you can go from one dish to another and graze. You have to concentrate.
Were you in the middle of another project at the time?
Yeah, pretty much. But that had to wait because I became aware that I had to do this.
Interesting.
And then I gave 100 pages to my editor and said, "Can you get me paid to do the rest of this?" At which point, I had to do the rest of it.
I'm very glad you did.
Yeah.
Very, very glad you did. You mentioned earlier in the show one of your other books, and I want to touch on that for a moment, The Baby Merchant.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. You're writing about a guy who steals children. And I remember thinking, in his mind, he's a very moral man. Even though, from my perspective, I mean, I think that's a horrific thing to do. But would you talk with us a little about how you create what I would term a sympathetic villain?
I wasn't thinking of him as a villain ever. I heard him. I heard his voice. I heard, "I am very good at what I do," and his whole little monologue about that, and was coming back from a place where I'd heard this on a train, and I made notes, and that was the beginning. And then I'm thinking, wait, what this guy does is awful, but he doesn't think it's awful. So then I had to think through, most people, if they do wrong things, think they're doing them for the right reasons. as I
very
think I've
true.
said, that I'm sure Hitler thought he was doing great things when he went out. I'm not going to write a sympathetic novel about Hitler, but a guy like this did indeed think that he was doing good, because he looked for children who were abandoned by parents who didn't love them, and he looked for people who were desperate for children and thought, well, why should they not, particularly since these people are prosperous, take care of this child that is somebody's extra that they don't want.
So from his perspective, he was doing a good thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's the key.
Yeah, it's like, oh wait, they don't love that baby. They're tired of it. Why? They don't need that. Let me take it away. And his problem was that he stole a baby from the wrong person. A woman who thought she didn't want her baby, which was, she was not married, did not want to be a single mom, and thought she did not want her baby, and found out when it was gone that she really did.
Aha. I want to ask you about Twitter and Facebook and blogs and all these new ways that writers are supposed to be in touch with readers. And what do you think about all that?
I was on a panel last week at the Wesleyan Writers Conference about this with Ron Hogan, who does Galley Cat, which is the Media Bistro publishing blog, and Alexander Chee, who's a novelist who blogs. And I think what Ron said, which I thought was extremely interesting, is that if you're going to Twitter and you want followers, you've got to be really interesting. And I knew, and I also know that blogs, there are millions of them, and how do you get a lot of followers on a blog? And I realized that if I did either of these things, and we talked about this in terms of what the audience, who were all people who wanted to be writers, could do, that I didn't want to give anything away. And somebody in the audience said the same thing. Do you really want to do for free something that you can get paid for? I don't have the energy to do that. I never kept a diary. I don't keep a journal because I never saw a psychiatrist, because I don't want to give anything away. It's all to be written about.
Interesting. Okay.
So what Ron said was that people who do tweet, and he has something like 1,500 followers, maybe 2,000 followers, is that writers who are nothing but sandwich boards bleeding their titles of their books get ignored, which also makes me wonder, because you've been to Twitter boot camp for publicists. If all you have to say is that you're trying to sell this thing, people aren't going to want to follow you, so they're not going to know. And what he said was that if you're a really interesting person, then they'll think, oh, okay, that person might be worth following.
Well, Kit, I will say that you are a very interesting person, and unfortunately, I'm getting the signal that we're out of time. So I do want to thank you for coming. It was so good to talk about Enclave, and I wish you great success with it. I also want to give a thank you to the Page One crew, and to those of you in the viewing audience. Please remember the words of Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." Find yours and tell it. Join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at Page One, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at pageonetv.com.